My name is Audrey Malone. I am 34 years old. And on the 14th of March, at 11 minutes past 9 in the evening, I was lying in an ICU bed at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee, with a ruptured appendix that had already gone septic, a fever of 104.3 degrees, and a drainage tube running out of my abdomen. The attending physician had told my emergency contact, my neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Ellery, that if I had arrived at the hospital 2 hours later, the outcome would have been different. Not uncertain, different. She used that word specifically because she was kind enough not to say the other one. My parents knew I was there. I had called my mother, Diane, at 7:17 that evening, while I was still coherent enough to dial. I remember the exact words I used. "Mom, I'm being admitted. They think it's my appendix and it may have burst. I need you. I need someone here," she said, "and I will carry this in my chest for the rest of my life." She said, "Audrey, tonight is Biscuit's birthday party. We've had this planned for 6 weeks. Your father already drove to the bakery and picked up the custom cake. You know how much Biscuit means to Shelby. Can't Patricia go with you?" Biscuit is my sister Shelby's golden retriever. He was turning 3. There was a catered party at my parents' home in Franklin, Tennessee, with a balloon arch and a photographer and 16 guests. My parents left their eldest daughter bleeding and septic in a hospital bed to attend a dog's birthday party. They did not come that night. They did not come the next morning. They arrived at the hospital 37 hours after my admission, by which point I had already been through emergency surgery, already spent a night alone in the ICU listening to machines breathe for the person in the next curtained bay, already understood, with a clarity I had never quite achieved before, exactly where I stood in this family, what they didn't know, what neither of them had any reason to suspect as they walked through those hospital doors with a gas station bouquet of carnations and an apology. I could see them already rehearsing on their faces. Was that 6 weeks earlier? I had received a certified letter from the law offices of Gareth and Whitmore in Nashville, and that letter changed everything about the future they thought they were securing for themselves. This is that story. Before I go further, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you right now as you listen to this? What time is it there? Drop your location and your local time in the comments below because I genuinely want to know who is listening and from how far this story has traveled. And if you connect with stories about women who are dismissed by the people who should love them most, women who quietly build something so extraordinary that the people who underestimated them have no words left, please like this video and subscribe to Revenge Chronicles. You will not regret it. Now let me take you back to the beginning because to understand the ICU, you have to understand the Malone family. My parents, Diane and Robert Malone, live in a 4-bedroom colonial in Franklin, Tennessee, a suburb south of Nashville where the lawns are always trimmed and the Homeowners Association sends polite letters about the height of your hedges. My father, Robert, is 61 years old. He spent 30 years as a commercial insurance adjuster, worked his way up to regional manager, and retired at 58 with a respectable pension and the quiet satisfaction of a man who had never once taken a risk he could not calculate in advance. My mother, Diane, is 58. She taught 3rd grade at Franklin Elementary for 22 years. She baked casseroles for new neighbors, organized the church Christmas drive every December, and was, by every external measure, the warmest woman you had ever met. She had a gift for performing warmth. She had it down to an art form. The art, I eventually learned, required an audience. When no one important was watching, she did not bother. Then there is my sister, Shelby Malone, 29 years old, the youngest, the last, the favorite, though no one in the family would ever use that word because using the word would require acknowledging the architecture of the thing, and acknowledging the architecture would require looking at what had been built at my expense. Shelby is beautiful in the way that makes people immediately want to help her. Pale blonde hair she has worn the same way since high school. Blue eyes that fill with tears in exactly the right moments. A soft voice that makes everything she says sound like a confession. She works part-time as a wellness consultant, which means she runs an Instagram account called Shelby Shines Tennessee, posts photos of crystals and herbal tea in capsule wardrobes, and charges $145 an hour for virtual coaching sessions on how to align your energy. She has 42,000 followers. My parents describe her to their friends as an entrepreneur. I am the other one. I am the one who studied pre-law at the University of Tennessee, graduated with honors in 2012, passed the bar on the first attempt, and spent a decade building my career as an estate planning attorney at a firm downtown called Whitmore Caldwell and Associates. I am the one who drove my parents to their doctor appointments when Dad had his knee surgery in 2019. I am the one who reviewed their mortgage refinancing documents in 2020 and found 3 errors that saved them $11,000. I am the one who handled my maternal grandmother's probate filing when she passed in 2017, doing the work for free, on nights and weekends, while billing 40 billable hours a week at the firm. I am the steady one, the capable one, the one they relied on and forgot to thank. There is a particular kind of invisibility that comes not from neglect but from assumption. My family did not ignore me the way cruel people ignore targets. They ignored me the way people ignore infrastructure. You do not think about the bridge you drive across every morning until the day it fails. I was the bridge. I got my mother a cardiologist appointment within 48 hours, when her doctor said the earliest opening was 3 weeks out. Because I knew which scheduling coordinator to call and I knew how to use language that moved things to the front of the line. I drafted the letter that got my parents their homeowner's insurance dispute settled for $4,200 more than the initial offer. I found the error in my father's retirement account rollover that would have cost him $23,000 in unnecessary taxes. I did all of this the way I did everything, quietly, competently, without announcement or invoice. Shelby's contributions to the family were different. They were visible. When Shelby organized a surprise birthday party for my mother in 2021, she posted the photos on Instagram with the caption, "The woman who made me who I am," and my mother cried and shared the post and called Shelby her heart. When I flew home the following March to sit with my mother for 4 days after a minor cardiac procedure, my mother told the neighbors I had come to visit for spring, the way you might describe a pleasant coincidence. There were no Instagram posts. There were no shared tears. There was just me, sleeping on the couch because Shelby's things were still in my childhood bedroom, driving my mother to her follow-up appointment at 7:15 in the morning and sitting in the waiting room for 2 hours with a book I did not read because I was watching the door. I want to be fair. Shelby is not a villain. She is a person who grew up in a system that rewarded her for being decorative and charming and emotionally expressive. And she became very good at those things the way anyone becomes good at what gets applauded. She is genuinely warm when the warmth costs her nothing. She genuinely loves biscuit. She genuinely believed, I think, that the birthday party was more important than my hospital admission. Not because she is callous, but because within the logic of our family's hierarchy, the dramatic and the visible had always outranked the serious and the quiet. A dog's birthday party was a production. It had a photographer. It had a balloon arch. It generated content. My appendix ruptured silently, the way I had always done everything, and in my family, silent suffering did not register on the scale of things that required response. I want to give you specific examples of what I mean, because I am an attorney by training and I do not make general claims without evidence. Christmas of 2020. I had been promoted to senior associate at the firm 3 months earlier. It was the biggest professional milestone of my life to that point. The result of 7 years of 60-hour weeks and enough holiday parties I forced myself to attend that I have permanently lost my taste for smoked salmon. We were at my parents' house, the whole family, around their dining room table. My father raised his glass and said, and this is the exact quote because I wrote it in my journal that night, "Well, to Shelby, who just hit 20,000 followers on Instagram. We are so proud of you, sweetheart. You've built something real." He clinked glasses with Shelby. He looked at me briefly. "Good year for everyone," he added, and then he sat down. I had told him about my promotion during the drive to dinner. He had said, "That's nice." He asked if I knew where the GPS wanted him to turn. March of 2022. My parents announced they were refinancing the house again and needed a short-term loan, not a gift. A loan with a repayment schedule, which my mother emailed me on a spreadsheet. $22,000. I lent it to them. I did not hesitate, because they were my parents, and I had the savings, and it seemed like the kind of thing a good daughter did. 6 months later, I saw Shelby post photos of a new car, a white Jeep Wrangler with tan leather interior. She had tagged my parents in the caption with 3 heart emojis. I called my mother and asked, not accusatorially but directly, whether the loan had been repaid from money that was then used for Shelby's car. My mother said, "Audrey, we helped both of you, just in different ways." The loan was never repaid, not a single dollar. August of 2023, I was in the hospital for a minor procedure, an outpatient thing, a laparoscopic fibroid removal that still required someone to drive me home afterward and check on me that evening. I called my mother 3 days ahead of time. She said she would come. She did not come. She texted at 2:17 in the afternoon, an hour before I was wheeled in, to say that Biscuit had eaten something concerning and Shelby needed moral support at the veterinarian. I took a rideshare home from the surgery center and sat alone on my couch eating crackers and watching television with a heating pad on my abdomen. I did not cry. I did not scream. I filed it away with all the others. Now you need to know about my grandmother because she is the engine of this entire story. Winifred Elaine Malone, my father's mother, known to everyone who loved her as Winnie. She died on the 4th of January of this year, 3 months before the ICU, at the age of 87, in the same farmhouse in Gallatin, Tennessee, where she had lived for 51 years. Winnie was not a wealthy woman in the way people usually mean. She did not wear jewelry. She drove a used Buick until she was 82. She cut her own hair until she was 75, but she had owned that farmhouse outright, bought it with her late husband Harold's life insurance in 1973. And she had also, quietly and without any fanfare, invested in a small portfolio of utility stocks and municipal bonds over 5 decades that had accumulated, with reinvested dividends and the patient compound math of time, into something none of us had fully calculated. I visited Winnie every month for the last 11 years of her life. I drove the 45 minutes to Gallatin on Sunday afternoons. I brought her tulips in spring and soup in winter and sat at her kitchen table while she told me stories about Harold, about raising 4 children in a farmhouse with 1 bathroom, about the summer of 1968 when she protested in Nashville and got arrested and never told her husband for 6 years. She was the only person in my family who ever asked me questions and waited for the actual answer. I want to be specific about what those Sundays looked like because the details matter when you are trying to understand why someone does what Winnie did. We would sit at her kitchen table with the green oilcloth cover that had been there since I was 8 years old, and she would make coffee from a percolator she had owned since 1977 and refused to replace because it still worked perfectly. And she would cut a store-bought coffee cake into exact squares and she would say, "So, tell me what is actually happening." Not "how are you," not fine, the social exchange, actually happening. And I would tell her about the case I was struggling with, about the colleague who had taken credit for my work on a real estate transfer, and I did not know how to address it without seeming difficult, about the way I had felt at Christmas, about the loan to my parents and the silence around the $22,000. Winnie would listen with her chin in her hand and her eyes on mine, and when I finished she would say exactly 1 or 2 things, never more, that landed so precisely they stayed with me for weeks. The summer before she was diagnosed with the congestive heart failure that would eventually end her life, she said something I wrote down that same evening. We had been talking about my parents, about some specific instance of Shelby being celebrated and me being assumed, and Winnie had listened, and then she said, "Audrey, I want you to understand something about people who take without acknowledging. It is not that they do not see you, it is that they have decided it is more convenient to pretend they don't. There is a difference. One is blindness. The other is a choice." I drove home on the interstate with that sentence turning over in my mind for 45 miles. In the last year of her life, when the heart failure had made the stairs difficult and she had moved her bedroom to the first floor, I came more often. Every 3 weeks instead of once a month, sometimes twice in a single week, if the drive aligned with something I had in the area. I brought her audiobooks she could listen to without the effort of holding a physical book. I brought her the kind of food that was easy to eat but did not taste like what it was, which is the challenge of cooking for someone whose appetite has become a quiet surrender. I sat with her when she could not sleep, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning, both of us quiet in the way that people are quiet when there is nothing useful to say and the company itself is the point. My father visited 4 times in the last year of Winnie's life. I know this because I kept a calendar. Not out of resentment, out of the particular instinct of an attorney who has learned that documentation is never wasted. About 18 months before she died, Winnie asked me to help her update her estate plan. As an estate planning attorney, I was the obvious choice. But I want to be transparent about something. I referred her to an outside attorney. I gave her the name of a colleague I trusted, a woman named Sandra Levitt, at a firm in Brentwood, because I knew how family matters became complicated when attorneys had personal stakes, and I wanted everything that Winnie decided to be entirely her own decision, documented by hands that had no inheritance to gain. I told Winnie directly, "Whatever you decide to leave to whomever, I want you to do it without me in the room." She patted my hand and said, "I know, sweetheart. That's exactly why I asked you." 6 weeks before the ICU, Sandra Levitt's office sent me a certified letter. I signed for it on a Tuesday morning and read it at my kitchen table with coffee that went cold while I read. Winnie had left her entire estate to me. The farmhouse in Gallatin, the brokerage account, the savings account, and a life insurance policy that had been silently accumulating cash value since 1984. The total, as appraised and calculated by Sandra's office, was $5,140,000. $5,140,000. To me, specifically, exclusively, by name. The letter included a sealed personal note from Winnie, written in her handwriting on her pale green stationery. I will tell you what it said later in the story when the moment is right. I did not call my parents. I did not call Shelby. I called Sandra Levitt and asked her to walk me through the documents. Then I called my own estate attorney, a colleague named Marcus Drew, at a firm I had no conflicts with, and I asked him to review everything and advise me on my next steps. Then I closed my laptop, drove to Gallatin, walked through Winnie's empty farmhouse, stood in her kitchen, where the tulips I had brought her in October were still in a vase on the windowsill, dried now and brittle, and I let myself feel the weight of what she had done. I want to pause here and say something to you, whoever you are, watching or listening to this right now. If you are the overlooked daughter, the capable one who handles everything quietly and gets flowers from a gas station when you nearly die while the dog gets a custom birthday cake, I want you to know that being seen is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives in a certified letter. Sometimes the person who really watched you was the one who said the least at family dinners, but sat with you longest at the kitchen table. If you are still watching, please take a second right now and leave a comment. Tell me something. Tell me if you have ever been the one who handled everything while someone else got the celebration. Because I think there are more of us than anyone realizes, and I think it helps to say it out loud, even here, even to strangers. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because the next part of this story is where everything your patience has been waiting for finally arrives. So, the ICU. Let me tell you what the 37 hours alone in that hospital room did for me. Because it was not nothing. It was, in fact, everything. I had surgery at 1:45 in the morning on the 15th of March. The appendix had perforated. The surgical team was efficient, skilled, and kind. I woke up in the recovery room at 4:20 with a tube in my arm and a nurse named Rochelle sitting next to me asking if I knew where I was. I told her Vanderbilt. She said, "Good, you're going to be okay." Those 5 words from a stranger were the first 5 words of comfort I heard. I lay there in the pale blue light of the recovery room and thought about my mother's voice on the phone the evening before. Biscuit's birthday. Custom cake. 6 weeks of planning. By 7 in the morning, I was in the ICU, stable but being monitored for the infection that had spread before surgery. My fever had come down to 101.8. They had me on broad-spectrum antibiotics through an IV. Mrs. Ellery, my neighbor, came at 8:30 with a bag of toiletries and a thermos of chamomile tea and sat with me for 3 hours without being asked. She is 71 years old. She has a bad hip and it takes her effort to walk the 2 flights of stairs in our building. She came anyway. At 2 in the afternoon on the 15th, my phone screen lit up. A text from my mother. "How are you feeling?" 3 words, after 21 hours. I stared at that text for a long time. Not with anger. I had moved past anger somewhere around 4 in the morning when the anesthesia was wearing off, and I was lying alone in the recovery room, listening to the sound of my own heart monitor. What I felt now was something much quieter and much more permanent. I felt resolved. I texted back stable. Surgery went well. No need to rush. She did not reply until the following morning. My parents arrived at the hospital on the afternoon of the 16th, a Sunday, 37 hours after I had been admitted. My father was wearing the blue Oxford shirt he always wore to things he considered obligations. My mother was carrying carnations wrapped in cellophane from the Kroger on Murfreesboro Road, the kind that cost $6 and are always slightly wilted. Shelby did not come. She sent a voice memo. I did not listen to it for 2 days. My father stood at the foot of my bed with his hands in his pockets the way he always did when he was uncomfortable. My mother put the carnations on the table next to the window and then sat in the chair beside the bed and reached for my hand. "We're so sorry, sweetheart. We didn't know it was this serious." I looked at her. "I had a fever of 104 and I told you I needed someone here." She had the grace to look away. "You know how hard it is for Dad to sit in hospitals. And Shelby meted us that night. It was a lot for her." I took my hand back. I adjusted the blanket over my legs. I said, "I know." And I let the silence do the rest. I want to be precise about this because it matters. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not list the ways they had failed me. That is not how I operate. And besides, my abdomen had 32 internal sutures and any significant muscular exertion was medically inadvisable. What I did instead was make a decision that I had technically already been building toward for 6 weeks, but which the 37 hours alone in that ICU room had made absolute and irreversible. I was discharged on the 19th of March with a course of oral antibiotics, a follow-up appointment scheduled for the 28th, and instructions to avoid heavy lifting for 6 weeks. Mrs. Ellery drove me home. She had cleaned my apartment while I was in the hospital. There were fresh flowers on my kitchen table and a container of homemade chicken soup in the refrigerator. I sat down at my kitchen table and called Marcus Drew. "The estate has cleared probate," he told me. "The farmhouse title transferred this morning. The brokerage account transfer is processing. You should see everything fully in your name within 10 business days." I thanked him, hung up, and sat with that for a moment. $5,140,000. Mine. Completely, legally, unambiguously mine. In those early weeks of recovery, I moved slowly through my apartment and my life with the particular attention that comes only after a body has been frightened into stillness. I was sleeping 9 hours a night, which I had not done since college. I was drinking water the way the discharge nurse told me to. 2 glasses before my first cup of coffee. I was walking, first just to the end of the block and back, then farther, then all the way to the park, 2 streets over, where there was a bench under a large oak tree where I would sit and look at the city and think without any particular agenda. It was the most unstructured thinking I had done in years. I thought about Winnie a great deal during those walks. I thought about the Sunday afternoons in Gallatin, about what it had meant to me to have one person in the world who asked questions and stayed for the answers. I thought about how I had normalized the absence of that in every other relationship in my life. I had gotten so accustomed to being the one who gave and received nothing back that I had stopped noticing the shape of what I was missing. The ICU had clarified it in the way that emergencies clarify things, not by showing me something new, but by removing the ambient noise that had been making it hard to hear what had always been true. At my follow-up on the 28th, my surgeon told me everything looked clean and well-healed. She was a precise, efficient woman named Dr. Sylvia Park, who moved through an examination with the economy of someone who had done 10,000 of them. She said, "Your recovery has been excellent. Whatever you've been doing, keep doing it." She meant the antibiotics and the rest. I thanked her and thought about the chicken soup and the bench under the oak tree and decided she was right in more ways than she intended. Now I need to tell you what Winnie's letter said. I saved it for this moment because it deserves its own space in the story. She had written it on 2 pages of her pale green stationery in the handwriting that had gotten shakier in her last 2 years, but was still unmistakably hers. All loops and deliberate pressure, like she wanted the words to last. It said, "My dearest Audrey, you are going to read this at a table somewhere and the coffee is going to get cold and you are going to cry a little, and that is fine. Let it be fine. I have watched your family for 60 years, and I have watched you for 34 of them, and I want you to know with absolute certainty that I see everything. I see who drives to Gallatin on Sunday afternoons. I see who proofread the estate documents for free and referred me to someone else because she did not want even the appearance of a conflict. I see who brings tulips and stays for 3 hours and asks questions about Harold and actually wants to know the answers. I see who held my hand in the hospital when Robert could not be bothered to take a day off from his fishing trip. I am leaving you everything, Audrey. Every dollar, every acre, every share. Not because I do not love Robert or the girls in my way, but because love without witness is not enough. I witnessed you, and I want you to have the ground under your feet that no one else in your life has ever thought to give you. Build something with it. Something with it. Something yours. Do not apologize for a single inch of it. All my deepest love, your Grandma Winnie." I did cry. I cried alone in my kitchen with cold coffee, and I let it be fine, exactly as she said. In the 8 weeks following my discharge from the hospital, I made a series of quiet, deliberate moves that I did not announce to anyone in my family. I hired a property management company to begin assessing the Gallatin farmhouse for either a long-term rental listing or a sale, depending on the market analysis, which came back favorable for a listing at $840,000. I sat with Marcus Drew for 2 full afternoons and restructured my personal financial accounts. I opened a new brokerage account under my own name at a different institution and began the transfer of Winnie's portfolio. I took 3 days off work in April and drove to Gallatin and walked the property carefully, room by room, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to let go. I kept the tulip vase. I kept Harold's old watch from the bedside table drawer. I kept the pale green stationery. During all of this, my family behaved entirely as expected. My mother called twice a week, cheerful, breezy, asking about my recovery and how the antibiotics were treating me and whether I was eating enough. The kind of calls that required nothing and offered nothing and felt like performances for an audience I had not agreed to be. Shelby texted occasionally, mostly memes, occasionally a selfie with biscuit captioned, "Send good vibes." My father sent a single email in late March that said, "Glad you're on the mend, Audrey. Let me know if you need anything." He signed it Dad. None of them asked about Winnie's estate. This surprised me at first, and then it did not. Winnie had been gone since January. They had attended the funeral, sat in the front pew, accepted condolences from neighbors who remembered my grandmother as a woman who had lived with remarkable decency and unremarkable income. No one had thought to ask what she left behind, because no one had been paying close enough attention to know that there was anything to ask about. In early May, I received a call from my father. He was cheerful in the way he got when he wanted something. "Hey Audrey, so your mother and I have been talking. Shelby's been looking at a house. A really nice place, great neighborhood, good investment. The thing is, the down payment is a stretch, and with your background in real estate law, we thought maybe you could advise us on the best way to help her get there. Maybe pull from savings, or look at a loan structure. We pay you back, of course." He laughed a little on the last sentence, the laugh of someone who knew and did not care that his word on repayment had no value left. I said, "Let me look into some options and get back to you." I did not tell him anything else. In the second week of June, I accepted an invitation to a dinner that Shelby had organized at my parents' house. She framed it as a family dinner, a belated celebration of my recovery, her words in the group text. "Be there or be square. Big sis." With a dog emoji and a heart. I confirmed I was coming. I also asked if I could bring a +1. My mother said, of course, the more the merrier. I brought Marcus Drew. I had told Marcus what I needed from him, not legal counsel for that evening, simply a professional witness. Someone who knew all of the documentation, all of the numbers, all of the history, and who could sit at a table and represent, by his very presence, the weight of what had quietly transferred into my possession while my family was planning Biscuit's birthday party. The dinner was on a Saturday evening in June at 6:30. My parents had set the table in the dining room, the good dishes, the ones they only used when they wanted to make an impression. Shelby was there with Biscuit, who sat in a custom dog bed in the corner of the dining room wearing a bandana that matched the table runner. I counted 7 guests, including Marcus and myself. My mother had made her pot roast, the one she only made for occasions. We ate. My father talked about his golf game. My mother talked about the neighbors. Shelby talked about a brand deal she was negotiating with a supplement company. Marcus listened and asked polite questions and ate his pot roast and said very little. I watched my family the way I had trained myself to watch people for a decade in courtrooms and conference rooms, looking for the architecture beneath the surface, for what was being built and what was being hidden. After dinner, while my mother was bringing out the dessert, a peach cobbler, my father leaned back in his chair with his wine glass and said, "So Audrey, have you had any more time to think about what we discussed? About Shelby's house?" Shelby looked up from her phone. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but not enough to say anything. My mother came in from the kitchen with the cobbler and set it on the table and sat down and looked at me with that particular expression she wore when she was about to participate in something that cost her nothing. I set down my fork. I looked at my father, then my mother, then Shelby. Then I said, "Actually, I've been meaning to tell all of you something, and I think now is a good time." The table went quiet. My mother stopped serving the cobbler. Shelby put her phone face down on the table. My father set down his wine glass. I said, "When Grandma Winnie passed in January, she left a will. I want you to know that her estate has cleared probate, and everything has transferred." My father frowned slightly. I didn't know she had much of an estate. I looked at him. She had $5,140,000 in the farmhouse, the brokerage account, and a life insurance policy she carried since 1984. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear Biscuit breathing in the corner. My mother's hand had stopped moving over the cobbler dish. Shelby had gone very still. My father's face had shifted through 3 expressions in the space of 2 seconds: confusion, then calculation, then something that looked almost like hope. And I watched all 3 of them arrive at the same assumption at the same moment. Marcus took a quiet sip of his water. He did not look at anyone. My father said, "Well, that's remarkable. We had no idea." He paused. "I assume she split it between the family?" I held his gaze. She left everything to me, exclusively, by name. She worked with an independent attorney, and the documents are ironclad. The hope drained out of his face. My mother set the serving spoon down on the table. It made a small clinking sound that felt very loud in the room. "To you," my mother said, not a question. "To me," I confirmed. Her reasoning is in the personal letter she left, which I have read and which is private. But she was of sound mind. She had independent counsel, and the estate is settled. Shelby looked at our mother. Our mother looked at our father. Our father looked at me with a face I had never seen him wear before. It was not anger, not yet. It was the expression of a man doing math he did not like the answer to. "Audrey," he said finally, his voice careful and controlled, "I hope you know that as a family we would want to make sure everyone is taken care of. Winnie would have wanted that." I looked at him. I thought about the carnations from Kroger, wilted and cellophane wrapped. I thought about the text that said, "How are you feeling after 21 hours?" I thought about the night I lay alone in an ICU room listening to the machines and the sound of my own heart, and I remembered exactly how much this family had shown up when it cost them something. I said, "I know you believe that." Then I looked at Marcus. Marcus opened the portfolio he had brought and set a single document on the table. "This is the transfer record," he said quietly. "The estate is fully settled. Audrey asked me to bring it tonight so there would be no ambiguity." My father stared at the document. He picked it up. He read it. He set it back down. Shelby's eyes had filled with tears. Not the right kind. The kind that come from disappointment, not grief. My mother said, very softly, "Audrey, surely you're going to share." I said, "I'm going to do what I think is right. I haven't made all of my decisions yet, but I want you to know where things stand." I picked up my fork and took a bite of the peach cobbler. It was very good. She had always been an excellent baker. In the 3 weeks following that dinner, my parents called 14 times between them. My father left a voicemail on a Tuesday evening at 8:42 that lasted 4 minutes and 50 seconds, in which he used the words family obligations 6 times and the phrase Winnie would have wanted twice. He did not mention the ICU. He did not mention the $22,000. He did not mention any of the Sunday afternoons in Gallatin. My mother sent a card, a physical card with a watercolor lily on the front that said she hoped I knew how much I was loved and that family was bigger than any one inheritance. She signed it, "Love, Mom and Dad," with little hearts. Shelby sent a voice memo that began with, "Okay, so I've been really processing this," and went on for 9 minutes. I listened to the whole thing. I owed her that much. It was, as I had expected, entirely about Shelby. On a Wednesday morning in late June, my father showed up at my office. He had never come to my office before. In 11 years of practicing law at an address he had been given many times, my father had never once passed through those doors for any reason. He sat in the reception area for 20 minutes while my assistant checked with me, and I finished the client call I was on before I walked out to greet him. He was sitting with his hands between his knees, his blue Oxford shirt looking smaller than I remembered. Not physically smaller, proportionally smaller. The way people shrink when the power dynamics that were maintaining them at a certain size are no longer operational. I walked him into my office. I offered him coffee. He said no. He looked around the room, at the bookshelves, at the diplomas on the wall, at the framed letter of commendation from the Tennessee Bar Association that I had hung between the windows because Marcus told me I was allowed to be proud of it. He had never seen any of it before. He was quiet for a long time. "I didn't know it was this serious," he said finally. He was not talking about the estate. I knew he was not talking about the estate. I knew he was not talking about the estate. "The night you called your mother, I didn't know." I sat across from him. I folded my hands on my desk the way I did in every difficult client meeting, calm and present and giving nothing away. "I told her it was serious," I said. "She told me." He exhaled. "She made the wrong call." It was the most direct thing my father had said to me in 34 years of conversation. I received it carefully. "She did," I said, "and I needed you both and neither of you came." He nodded. He did not try to explain or justify or reframe. He just nodded. We sat in that shared acknowledgement for a moment, and it was more honest than any conversation I could remember having in that family. He did not ask about the money again that day. He stood up, thanked me for seeing him, shook my hand at the door like I was a colleague, and then stopped in the hallway and turned around. "You look like her," he said. "Winnie. Around the eyes. I never told you that." I said, "I know." Because I did know. Winnie had told me herself. I did not respond to the calls for 2 weeks. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. I had things to decide and I needed space around the decisions to make sure they were mine, not reactions. Here is what I decided. I sold the farmhouse in Gallatin for $860,000, $20,000 above asking, to a young couple from Memphis who were moving to Tennessee to start a small lavender farm. They had a border collie named Pete. I thought Winnie would have liked them. I kept the tulip vase and Harold's watch. I kept the pale green stationery. I set up a donor-advised fund in Winnie's name, specifically for the benefit of elderly women in rural Tennessee who needed in-home care. I funded it with $500,000 as an initial contribution. I named it the Winifred Elaine Malone Care Fund. I put the remaining balance into a set of accounts Marcus helped me structure, properly diversified, professionally managed, entirely mine. I did not give my parents money for Shelby's house. I did not repay myself the $22,000 loan either, not because I had forgotten, but because I decided the act of releasing it was worth more to me than the money. I would not carry that debt as a wound anymore. I just let it go. I called my mother on a Thursday evening in July at 7 o'clock. I told her I had made my decisions and I wanted her to hear them from me directly. I told her about the Lavender Farm couple and about the Winifred Elaine Malone Care Fund. I told her I had restructured my finances and was in a very stable position. I told her I would not be contributing to Shelby's down payment, but that I wished Shelby well and hoped she found the right house at the right time. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Audrey, when you were in that hospital, we were scared too. You know that." I said, "Mom, I know you love me in the way you know how, but Biscuit's party was more important than your daughter's ruptured appendix, and I think we both need to sit with that fact for a while before we try to move forward." She did not respond right away. When she did, her voice had lost its performance quality. It was quieter, smaller, more like the voice of a woman who had just been handed a mirror she had not asked for. "I didn't think it was that serious," she said. I said, "I told you it was serious." She said, "I know." I said, "I know you know." We talked for 40 minutes. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. She cried at some point, real tears, the kind that do not announce themselves or require an audience. My father got on the line near the end and said very little, mostly that he was sorry, and that he was proud of me. And the second part landed strangely because it arrived 34 years too late, and we both knew it. I thanked him for saying it anyway. I meant that. I am not estranged from my family. That is not the ending of this story, because estrangement was never the goal. The goal was never to punish them. It was to stop absorbing punishment myself, which is a different thing entirely. I see my parents now in a way that is more honest and less hungry. I do not arrive at their house hoping to be the daughter they finally see. I arrive as who I already am, someone Winnie saw clearly, someone Mrs. Ellery drove to the hospital and cleaned the apartment for, someone who built a career and paid her own debts and sat at a grandmother's kitchen table and asked about Harold and actually wanted to know the answers. Last month I drove back to Gallatin. The Lavender Farm couple had gotten started. There were rows of seedlings in the side field where Winnie used to keep her tomato garden, purple and silver green in the morning light. They waved at me from the porch and invited me in for coffee. I sat at the kitchen table in Winnie's kitchen with strangers who had made it something new, and I thought about what it means to be witnessed. Not celebrated, not rewarded. Witnessed. There is a difference. Celebration is public and performative and often arrives in proportion to what people think they will gain from you. Being witnessed is private and patient and free of calculation. It asks nothing back. Winnie witnessed me for 34 years, and then she did something with what she saw. She handed me ground to stand on, not revenge, not justice. Ground. If you are the one who handles things quietly, who drives the 45 minutes and brings the tulips and asks about the people no one else remembers to ask about, I want you to hear this. The act of showing up is never wasted. not ever, even when the room is empty, even when no one acknowledges it, even when you lie in an ICU and the phone does not ring. Someone is always watching, more carefully than you know. And sometimes they are taking notes on pale green stationery. That is not a guarantee. I am not going to tell you that every quiet effort gets rewarded, because that would be a lie, and you deserve the truth. What I will tell you is that the life you build in your own hands, the one made from showing up when it is inconvenient and doing the right thing when no one is applauding, that life is already the inheritance. Everything else is compound interest. I will leave you with this question. Is there someone in your life right now who is witnessing you? Really watching, the way Winnie watched me? And if there is, have you told them what that means to you? Leave your answer in the comments. I would genuinely love to read it. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for listening to a story that is quiet and not especially dramatic in the way that explosions are dramatic, but that mattered to every bone in my body when it was happening. And now it is yours too. Take care of yourselves out there. I will see you in the next one. I want to take a moment before we close to say something to you directly. You, the person who found this channel and stayed through to the end. You have no idea how much that means. There are 3 of us behind Revenge Chronicles, 3 people who believe that the quietest stories carry the heaviest truth, and we show up every single day to tell them. If Audrey's story reflected something you have lived, something you have felt in your own chest at your own family dinner table, please subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an episode. We drop new stories every day. Leave a comment telling me what part of the story stayed with you longest. Was it the ICU? The letter? The peach cobbler? Tell me. Every comment matters more than you know. This channel exists because of you, and we are not stopping. The loudest comebacks are built in silence. We will see you tomorrow.